Hey Internet, welcome to Worldview Everlasting, your favorite YouTube addiction. I got a question from a viewer here about Jesus and the meaning of the word generation, particularly in the Gospels. And I'm gonna take us to Matthew because that's where it's the clearest. But here's the question: I can't really tell if this is one of those honestly I'd like to know questions, or if this is one of those haha I'm an atheist I gotcha questions, right? Which is always so pleasurable. It'd be nice if we could talk, like we're all intellectuals and like atheists don't the only ones who have logic because you aren't. You really aren't. Like there's other intelligent people out there who just disagree with you about how we interpret what we see, right? And we don't deny that reality exists. Anyway, here's the question: in the New Testament. Gospels mostly, Jesus assured his disciples that he would return in their generation. That's an assertion, and no, you're wrong. But we'll look at that. We'll look at why you're wrong. You're misunderstanding a number of things, and this is kind of one of the key rules. If you want to debunk a religion, you gotta like let them define their own terms. You can't come in, redefine their terms, and then say, "Haha, you win!" Right? That's like coming into a poker game and throwing down someone saying, "Gin rummy, I win." You can't do that. You have to play by the actual rules, and so the text has a meaning, and you got to use that meaning. So he doesn't say he'll return within their generation. He says that the temple will be destroyed in their generation. And remember, there's this amazing connection between the temple and Jesus' body. And so even his own death would have fulfilled this because that's the real temple. But the actual temple does get destroyed, the one in Jerusalem in 70 AD. We'll look at this in Matthew just briefly here. But continuing kind of with a caveat on your assertion there, also throughout the New Testament, Paul and others expected Christ to return. Yeah, and we still do, and he did, and rightly so. But he didn't necessarily believe it would happen in his lifetime, nor did John. John even says at the end of his gospel, "Yeah, I'm going to die, and Jesus isn't coming back before I die." So, again, you're stretching here, yeah. Even admonishing Christians not to marry. Yeah, Paul, if you read really carefully there, that whole section where he says have them not marry, he actually says this isn't from Jesus. It's like the only place in the Bible that you can like say it's not inerrant because Paul says this is from me and not from the Lord. Yeah. And he basically then goes and says, look, the life I live without a marriage, it's a little bit easier. I don't have a lot of the distractions of life. And I kind of wish everyone had this gift that I have. But he also acknowledges that not everybody does. And this has always been the position of the Lutheran Church on celibacy. It is a spiritual gift if there ever was one. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen. And it's just going to be given to you. It's not really something to be pursued. But anyway, if you don't have the cares, I mean, I can admit this. I got a wife and kids, and I really benefit from that. But at the same time, it adds a lot of worry to my life that wouldn't be there if they weren't there. Why do you think all the 40-year-old boys out there aren't getting married these days? It's a lot easier not to have those worries. That's kind of where Paul's going. He's talking about in a persecuted age, right, where you're worried about getting killed for the faith, being burned out there. Who's going to take care of your family? And it's a reason for you to deny the faith. That's where he's going. So again, you're reaching if you're making this your argument for he was convinced Jesus would come back before he died. He really didn't have that point of view. And of course, they were wrong. Jesus didn't return before their life. Well, of course, Jesus didn't return before their lives ended, but they weren't wrong. They never said he was going to come back before their lives ended. So again, you're building an argument based on texts that aren't actually there. You're going in, you're changing the text, and then you're accusing us of like failing, right? You can't do that. This is a big argument against creation science. Sometimes is that it like plays with the scientific evidence fast and loose and doesn't really interpret it based on its own rules, based on its own understanding. And I would agree that that's wrong, right? You got to be really careful. You want to actually use the rules the argument you're arguing against uses. Otherwise, you can't really say you win. So, how can Christianity be true? You mean Christianity, right? I get it. You're too lazy to type a ch. But seriously, dude, like it's insulting, right? You're writing to me to insult me to get me to answer a video, which I'm going to do. And I hope you can tell, I'm really not mad at you. I just think that you're being childish in the way you're approaching this. Now, you want the answer. Matthew 24 is where you want to go. And this is the whole thing about, Jesus said it was going to happen in a generation. There is a very, very clear textual answer to this. And all it requires is that you read the book as carefully as you would read any other book in any literature class that you're planning to make an argument on. That is, you use a hermeneutic, a rule for interpretation, where you let the book itself play by its own rules and you make your argument within that world, even if you disagree with that world. It's a classic kind of humanities way of learning to argue. Often you need to argue for a point that you don't agree with, but you got to do it within the structure. It's very valuable to learn how to think that way, right? And if you can't do this, I would challenge you yet again that which side is logic on at this point? So anyway, Jesus is standing outside the temple. he's just had a big spiel, a debate kind of stuff with the Pharisees. It's Holy Week. He's going to die this week. And he gets asked a question as he leaves the temple. Actually, I said that wrong. As he leaves the temple, his disciples first are marveling at the temple itself. Like, Jesus, isn't this place amazing? This is going to be your fortress when you rule. Like this week, when you take the crown and become king of the world. This is great. And he's like, hey, guys, this stuff is lame. This is mammon. This doesn't mean anything. You're going to see all of these stones thrown down, not one will be left upon the other. And he just shuts up and he walks across the valley up to the other side of the hill. There's kind of a valley there with a big hill, and you can look out the Mount of Olives down at the temple. And he sits down, and when they're there later, they're like freaked out. Like, wait a minute. This temple is like the heart and soul of the old covenant. How can it possibly be destroyed? Jesus, and they ask a question. Now pay attention to the question very carefully when you look at your Bibles. Matthew chapter 24, verse 3. Jesus, tell us, when will these things be? That's the thing you were talking about, the temple. And they confuse the temple with their next question. They think they're asking one, but they're asking two. And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? So, Jesus, when's the temple going to be cast down? And when will the end of the world be? Because obviously it's the same thing. See, they make an assertion, but they're wrong, right? Just like your question made an assertion, it had an error in the question itself. Their question has an error. They're asking two questions. When's the temple going to be torn down? When's the end of the world? Jesus answers them both, and he gives you keys to know when each one's talked about. He's going to talk about these things. He's going to talk about that thing. That is, he's going to say, he's going to talk about in those days, and I got to skim down. I didn't prep this. I'm acting like Brian Wolfmueller here, not having a total prep. Where we are. First, he gives a warning against, you got to kind of skip ahead a little bit. He gives a warning against false teaching in general in verse 4 and following. Watch out that you're not dissuaded. There's going to be wars, rumors of wars, all sorts of stuff's going to happen before even the temple gets torn down. None of this is a sign of either the temple or the end of the world. You, the apostles, are going to be delivered over to all sorts of tribulation and are going to be killed. Notice that, right? And you will be hated by all nations, yada, yada, yada. And the gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed. And when you see the abomination of desolation, something that happened to tip them off, that the temple had been desecrated, then you know to flee to the mountains, because the temple is going to be torn down at that time. And then here's the key. So now he's talking about those days, verse 29. He says, immediately after those days, that is the days of the temple that we're talking about, something apocalyptic will happen. You got to have some understanding of the Old Testament to understand that he says, the sun will be dark and the moon will not give his light, the stars will not shine from the sky. This is Old Testament language to say there will be an upheaval and a change, the likes of which is hard for you right now to imagine. He's not actually talking about the sun being darkened. The Old Testament made the same prophecies, and they didn't talk about the sun being darkened. They were usually talking about the rise and fall of kingdoms. And what's happening now is the Old Covenant, the temple covenant, is passing away, right? All the tribes of the earth will mourn at this sign of the Son of Man, this appearing in the heavens, the sign of the Son of Man, which is the destruction of the temple. He's foretold it. It comes to pass. And they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and glory, often assumed, even by Christians, to mean coming down. But if you look at the reference to Daniel, when the Son of Man comes with glory in the clouds, he doesn't come down, he goes up. Yeah, he goes up, he ascends to the Ancient of Days. So the temple is a sign of Jesus' ascension and his power over all things. The old covenant has passed away, the new covenant has come. Learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its branches come out, you know that it's summer. So also, when you see what I've just told you happening, the abomination, desolation, you know that the destruction of Jerusalem is at the very gates. End of verse 33. I say to you, this generation will not pass away before these things take place. There's your verse that you're hinging everything on. He's talking about the destruction of the temple. The generation will not pass away. They didn't. 70 AD, heaven and earth will pass away, and my words will never pass away. And then pay so close attention to verse 36, where he shifts and answers the other question. He's been talking about those days. For verse 36, but concerning that day, the end of the world, no one knows, not even the angels nor the Son. This is Jesus. Jesus, don't even know the end of the world, so I can't even tell you about when it's going to happen. Even Jesus couldn't say it was going to happen in his disciples' lifetime because they didn't know. Only the Father knows. And he goes on to tell you how when the end of the world comes, no one will be expecting it. Everything will be happening just as normal. There will be no signs, no way to tell that it's coming. It's just going to happen. The only thing we're finally given is that we know it will come soon, no matter what. So wherever you live, you can't assume there's something more waiting for it to happen. It could be at any moment and at any time. And that is the Christian confession, that we look for this resurrection of the dead, and we don't know when it's going to be. And so in every age, yeah, of course, you expect it to happen in your age, and you do also expect things to possibly go on. And that's what happened in that first century. So I appreciate the question, and I gave you an answer. Whether you accept it or not, I can't control. I remember sitting over coffee one time with an atheist who'd called me up and wanted to take me out to talk about this question. He was so convinced that he was going to win on this one. He said, oh, you can't answer this question, Pastor Fisk. And he set it down to me, and I walked him through all this. He said, nope, none of it means that. I'm like, well, you're making stuff up then, right? I gave you a meaning. The words are there on the text. I'm just dealing with what the text says as a whole text. I'm not picking verses out of it. I'm making the whole text mean one thing, and it's all based on having words have meanings. And if you're going to throw that out, well, then, again, who's got logic on their side at this point? So, anyhow, I hope this question helps. A little bit longer dropkick there for you, but I hope this helps anybody who's watching it out there deal with this. No one knows the day or the hour. All these guys predicting the end of the world, the blood moons, all this kind of stuff, they're just making stuff up. Go back and watch Tuesday's video from First Timothy about false teachers lying for gain and gaining money through their professed godliness. That's what that stuff's all about. You don't know when the end of the world will be, which is why Jesus says, watch, stay awake. And all that means is go to church, learn the word, learn to confess it, put your hope in his resurrection and not much trust in this age, which is always passing away. All right, cool. Thanks for tuning in to Worldview Everlasting. Catch you guys next time. Rock on.